Welcome to my slides.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is best practices for communication with your participants, because without good communication, well, we'll just get into it. All right, let's see if I can get it to advance. There we go. So why it matters. What you're doing is using the power of connection to bring people into the world of plants. And not everybody you work with is going to be as enthusiastic as all of us are about growing things. It's a process that takes time, just like growing plants takes time. Growing the love of taking care of plants takes time and communication as well. So by treating others with dignity and courtesy, by making sure that we're always valuing different perspective and different people's life experiences, and making sure that we're taking other people's feelings into account, we're starting to build those bridges that are getting people into our world of plants. So as volunteers, and I am just past being an Alamance County Master Gardener volunteer. I'm taking a break because of my schedule, but it's one of my favorite things to do. So I know from my work as a volunteer that we create the atmosphere that makes it a positive and a welcoming environment. Even when somebody is thinking, I don't have a green thumb, I'm just going to kill the plants. We're the way in for people. So we want to build trust and rapport with our participants. And that helps people go from just being observers, saying, I just want to sit here and watch, I don't want to do anything right now, to becoming an active person in the program. And it always reflects positively on Master Gardeners when they know that they're going to come into a welcoming space and learn something. And without positive communication, you might end up with hurt feelings. You might end up with disengagement when somebody just comes once or twice and then drops off and doesn't answer the phone anymore. It could damage the program's reputation, which is not great. And the one that I worry about the most is doing unintentional harm to vulnerable populations. So you mean really well, and by accident, without even meaning to, we've traumatized somebody that wasn't in a position to handle it. So it's why communication always makes a big difference. And what we're looking for is to just make sure that we always create a better participant experience. So by having positive communication, it helps our participants feel like they're being seen and heard, that they're valued as individuals, that we see them as peers rather than less than. Like I'm talking down and teaching you instead of reaching across, like you see in the little picture there, and sharing something with you. And we want them to feel safe in our space that we're creating to share their real selves. And that's part of the therapeutic horticulture experience, is creating those safe spaces for people. We use the plants as part of that, but we use ourselves as part of that too. So we want the entire experience to be welcoming. One thing that one of my participants told me one time is that he liked working with plants because plants didn't talk back to him. And I said, oh, that's very accurate. Like they communicate with us. They tell us when they need water or food or better light source, but they don't talk back. They're not judgmental. So people feel very comfortable once they get into the world of plants. And we want to be part of that rather than, the opposite. We want to be one of the people they do want to be around. So you might be wondering, what is positive communication? I don't want to hurt anybody. And of course we don't. So one of the key elements is called active listening. And you may have heard that before. And so, well, I always listen to people. But active listening is a process. So you're going to be paying attention to somebody. You ask clarifying questions. So you repeat what they've said. You paraphrase it and say, what I heard you say was this. Does that sound about right to you? And that's summarizing what you heard. You try to maintain eye contact. That can be a cultural thing for some groups that you're working with, and the facilitator that you're working with as a volunteer can help let you know if you're working with a group that doesn't do well with eye contact. So if you're working with people, let's say on the autism spectrum or in certain Eastern cultures, eye contact can be seen as disrespectful or difficult. But for most people, eye contact is really important, and it shows that you're paying attention to them and really listening. And I'm sure we've seen pictures of people that are on their phone, they're looking at their phone instead of paying attention, and we think, oh, that's really disrespectful. That's not maintaining eye contact. So it's just one of those, there's really important things that hopefully we're all pretty good at that already. But when you're dealing with somebody in an active listening situation, you summarize what you heard, you nod, you use body language, acknowledge that you're following the conversation, and do your very best not to interrupt while they're speaking. Let them finish what they're saying, and then say, then it's your turn, and that way you create a positive, respectful exchange between you and the person that you're listening to. And language matters a lot. We try to use inclusive and unbiased language. We check with the facilitator to figure out what the preferred terms are. So instead of saying we're going to go work with the old people today, we're going to be working with elders, or we're going to be working with residents of this community. And we can say old people among ourselves if we want to. We're joking, but
just free reign right there.
yeah. But when we're working, we would just want to use respectful, because that sets your mindset up to know that you're working with people who are peers. And I know it's hard as plant people to avoid jargon or slang, or language that makes people feel a little bit like outsiders. We know a lot of the plant terms, we know a lot of the horticulture terms. It's just we talk like that amongst ourselves because we know the words, so we all speak that language. But it's important to try and set the jargon aside and not dumb it down, because our participants aren't dumb. But when you're going to use a term, define it. Just say, this is a cotyledon. It's the seed leaves. They're the first two leaves that come up, and they're not going to look at all like the rest of the leaves on the plant. So that's a cotyledon. We can call it seed leaves, or you don't have to remember it at all. But just so I've said the horticulture terms. So we try not to assume that people know our language, but to teach it when it's appropriate or when people seem interested, and not leave people out by using words that they might not have heard before, even though we use them every day. And then tone matters. This is one that I've heard a lot in working with volunteers over the years. People mean really well when they're trying to speak to somebody that when it's a new helping relationship or a new group that they've not worked with before. Have you all ever heard special voice before?
Yes.
Okay, you might know what I'm talking about. When I went into a group, I was working with a group of folks that were young adults who had intellectual disabilities, learning disabilities. And a couple of the volunteers that were new in the group went in and spoke with them and said, "Hello, Aaron, how are you today?" And they meant really well. But Aaron was a 40-year-old man, and Aaron didn't respond well to being talked to like that. That's special voice. So we want to use just our regular natural tone that we would use in speaking to each other when we're talking to participants. Because special voice makes people feel like, oh, I don't want to do this. And it can cause people to disengage. They'll be polite, they'll come to the one group, and then you may never see them again. And you don't want that to be the reason why. You don't want anything to be the reason why. We want people to feel included and feel like they're in a place where they are valued and seen as peers. So some of the nonverbal, we talked a lot about language. So some of the nonverbal things that we can do as volunteers is, as we said, eye contact when you're speaking or listening, unless somebody has clued you in and said, they don't respond well to eye contact. Use a neutral facial expression or a smile. Try open posture, which is avoiding having your arms crossed. That's called a closed posture, but having an open posture just helps people feel welcome. It's just one of those nonverbal things that we pick up on when we're really young, and we carry it with us our whole lives. And one of the things I always try to include when I'm talking about nonverbal is to avoid touching participants unless it's part of the activity that everybody's agreed to. And that's more of a horticultural therapy tactic. So if you have to do hand over hand guidance for somebody, that's more of a clinical thing. But we want to avoid touching participants because it can just make them feel uncomfortable. Now, if it's somebody that you've been working with for a long time and they want to do a fist bump and they initiate it, go for it. That's great. But it's just not the best way to start the helping relationship if it feels like something that they might not want. So just things to consider. So now that we've talked about positive communication and some of the keys that help that go well, you might run into some challenging situations. Sometimes the groups that you're working with are dealing with a lot of stress in their lives, and they bring all that into the group with them because we are human beings. We bring our stuff with us wherever we go. So if you're working with a group of young people and it's a Friday afternoon and they literally can't sit still, that can be a challenging situation. If you're dealing with a group of adults and two of them start not getting along real well, that can be a challenging situation. There's lots of them. And difficult conversations can happen. So it's important to remain calm and respectful. Just you can be the model of a good response. So instead of panicking or disengaging from them, you get to model how to handle a challenging situation by kind of, I guess, being on your most, professional behavior. Take a deep breath and focus on the issue or the situation, not the person. The person is doing the best they can with the tools that they have, and you have these other tools, and you can show them a better way to be if they're kind of losing their calm a little bit. And then you can always get support from the program staff where you're working or from another volunteer if it gets, if it gets heated or if people are not getting along or if you just need a little extra help. So, and it probably doesn't need to be said, but you're always working with somebody that knows the person. When we go in as volunteers, we are never just left by ourselves with participants. We always have somebody from our host agency with us that knows them and can help manage things or help, refocus things or guide them into a different activity to help get them calmed down a little bit. And when there is conflict, this happens a lot if you're working with elementary or younger children. Conflict just comes up. They're learning how to deal with conflict for the very first time in their lives. They're outside of their family circle with all of these new little people, and not everybody is going to get along all the time. So again, we model what good behavior looks like so that they can learn from us. We listen to all sides. We try to find common ground. We approach it as all of us working against the problem instead of us against each other. And then we get the staff and supervisors involved if it gets to a point where we can't just talk it out. And I've seen this happen quite a bit, especially you think of gardens as a very peaceful place, and they are. But if you get a really exciting plant that everybody wants, it can get heated when there's not enough to go around and we have to make choices. And and he gets all the good plants, and so we just have to finesse those situations. So this is a big one. If you come away with nothing else but this slide from my talk, we have all learned something today. It took me a while to figure this out, so I'm giving you some of the tricks of the trade here. A lot of the times, the people that you're working with in a therapeutic setting don't have a lot of choices elsewhere in their lives. They're in a care situation where caregivers or family members are making those choices for them. If you're working with people that live in a group home setting, like an assisted living facility, a nursing facility, even school children, they don't always have a lot of areas where they can make choices. So we have this awesome opportunity to give them a choice. So consider every time you go in, every time you plan a session, think about ways where you can always offer two different options to participants. It can be which tool to use, which color do you want, which size, which pot do you want next, this one or that one? Where would you like to sit? Do you want to sit in the sun or in the shade? Do you want water now or do you want water in 20 minutes? Do you want to sit here and watch, or would you like to take an active role? It's a huge key to full participation. And what you'll find when you're working with groups that are in a caregiving situation where they are not the caregiver, where they're receiving care, a lot of times they have sort of lost their self-determination muscle, if you will. And they'll say, oh, I don't care. It doesn't matter. You pick for me. And as a facilitator, as a therapeutic horticulturist, I don't let that happen. I insist that they make a choice, because I think it's really, really important to preserve their self-determination. And what that means is that they are making the choice, and that's what engages them in the activity. So if I've chosen for them and they don't feel like it, it's on me. But if they've chosen it, it engages them in the activity. And you might think, why 2 options? Why can't I just set a whole, a whole tray of 16 different brightly colored pots with plants and have them choose from that? Well, that's a little bit like going in the cereal aisle if you don't normally go grocery shopping, and giving you all of the options in the cereal aisle and saying, pick one. You might just say, I don't feel like cereal, actually. I'm keep moving. So by giving 2 options, it's a manageable choice for people that don't have a lot of choice. You are welcome to say, if they look at those 2 and say, I don't like either one of those, switch one of them out and give another, sub another one in. But by giving all of the options, that can be really overwhelming, and it can make people feel like, no, I'm going to pick the wrong one. But if you give 2 options, that's almost always somebody will pick between 2 things. So be really creative when you're planning your sessions and planning your activities, and think of all the different ways that you can offer choices, and then do that. And you'll have people that say they had a wonderful time. Even if you think they just sat there and watched, they got to make some choices. And that's something that is maybe something they thought was in their past is now in their present and in their gardening life again. So good stuff. So some key takeaways we've talked about: being an active listener, using positive body language, so uncrossing your arms. Try to put yourself in their shoes and think about things that they would like, things that would be helpful to them. If you're working with a population that has different body abilities than you do, get down on a level. If there are people that are seated in wheelchairs or who are going to be doing the activity seated, sit down and see, oh, you know what? I can't see that thing that we're all supposed to be looking at, because sitting down, it doesn't show up. So you can adjust the environment to what the participants need. Always model a really great response. Go in with a positive attitude and represent the very best of cooperative extension. So if you're wondering where all of this stuff came from, here's a bunch of really cool adaptive tools that you might run into when you get going on this. I teach the 4-course online certificate program, and you can take a snap of that if that's something that you might be interested in learning more about really the nuts and bolts of how this is done. So we go into where therapeutic horticulture came from, how to develop a program, how to accommodate different populations that have lots of different needs, and then how to manage a program once you get it going.
We have 2 people in here right now who have taken one of your classes.
That's awesome. I am excited about that. That's how to find me. That's my contact information. And now, if you have any questions, I'll stop sharing.